tell the heart, don't act this way, or don't be this way, don't do this, or you must do that. Hashem gave us the power that the brain could control the heart. Now, but I'm going to tell you something now, which is, of course, extreme. I'm giving you the introduction, it's extreme. But nevertheless, this is one of the lessons we learned. So there was a chassid of the Alter Rebbe. His name was Moshe Meisnish, senior chassid. And he said that this principle, the mind controls the heart, saved his life. And there's a lot of background to the story. I'm going to say that for a little bit later in the year when it's more relevant. But general background is that there was a war between Russia and France, between the Tsar and Napoleon. And in that war, the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad, was very involved. He was very involved spiritually because he was determined that Russia should win the war, not Napoleon, because he felt that Napoleon would bring into the world a spirit of liberalism and not belief in God and bring Jews away from Torah and mitzvahs. And therefore the Alter Rebbe did whatever he did spiritually. But in addition to that, he did something else. He appointed a chassid, his name was Moshe Meisnish, and he gave him the mission to act as a spy to help the Russian army. So this is a typical chassid with a long white beard. How did he become a spy? Because he lived in Vilna at the time, which was apparently close to France and to Russia. So he spoke both languages. He spoke French and he spoke Russian. And therefore, they were looking for people who could translate documents, and he offered his services as a translator. He would sit in his room translating, but he would listen to the discussions, to the conversations. They had no clue. They looked at him like somebody who doesn't really understand what's going on. He's just translating a language. And as a result of that, he was able to know information, found a way to pass on the information to the Russian army. And in that way, he was able to help them in many ways. And to the extent that as a result of that, the Alter Rebbe and his son and his grandson, all the Rebbes of Chabad, until communism came in, all enjoyed a certain privilege from the Russian government as a result, as their thank you for how much he helped them during the war. So we said that there was a time where they had a plan, the French army had a plan, and they realized at the last moment that the French knew about their plan, because as they were about to execute the plan, they were stopped and they never managed to do what they wanted to do. I don't want to go into the story, what happened. Like I said, I'll leave the details for a later time in the year. And they realized there must be a spy somewhere amongst the highest people in the army, because how would they know this plan? Didn't even dawn on him that he might be the person. So one day, he was sitting in a big room. The generals were sitting in one end of the room making their plans. He was sitting at the other end of the room and doing his translation. And suddenly the door flies open and Napoleon himself walks in. Napoleon walks in, looks around, and he sees this chassid sitting there. And he says, "What is he doing here?" And the next word that came out of his mouth, he said, "He's the spy." And as he said these words, he put his hand on his heart. Napoleon put his hand on the chassid's heart to see how fast it's beating. Now, I guarantee you, the most innocent person in the world, if Napoleon would say, "I accuse you of being a spy," his heart would be racing. But I guess if you're innocent, it'll be racing 100 miles an hour. If you're guilty, it'll be racing 200 miles an hour. It was like a lie detector machine, sort of a homemade system. He put his hand on his heart to see how fast his heart would be racing. So the chassid said, because I was trained by the Alter Rebbe that the mind controls the heart, my heartbeat was regular, as if nothing happened. And when he saw that, just waved his hand like, this guy's an idiot. He has no clue what's going on. And he went on. That saved his life. So I'm not saying that we could reach that level. That's definitely something extraordinary. But the principle is that the mind does control the heart. So therefore, if I have an impulse to do something wrong, because that's my nature, that's not an excuse. It just means it's difficult. But if I know what's right and I sort of command myself to do what's right, Hashem created us in a way that the mind is capable to control the heart. That's what this word means. Meir shalit alalev. So this brings us to number 2 on the list. What's number 2? Another famous quote. Ein loch ben chorin elami sheisik b'Torah. The only person that's truly free is one that studies Torah. Seems to be a shocking statement, because I would think of somebody who studies Torah is anything but free. He can't eat what he wants. He can't eat it when he wants. You can't wear what you want. You can't do what you want. Every day you have to check, is it Shabbos? Is it Rosh Chodesh? Is it Yom Tov? Is it Yom Kippur? It is always things that will restrict you. And there's probably no place else that has so many restrictions like the Torah. And yet, what does it say here? The only free person is the Torah. What does that mean? So I'm going to explain it now. Generally speaking, it means like this, that if a person is a slave to their own impulses, I can't control myself, then to a certain extent, I'm not a free person. In other words, what's the difference if there's another person that's controlling me and not letting me do what I want? If there's a government, like a communist government, that's not letting me do what I want, or there's something in me that's not letting me do what I want. So if a person says, for example, I'd love to stop smoking, but I can't help myself. I love to stop drinking, I can't help myself. I love to stop eating all this food that I'm eating, and I can't help myself. To a certain extent, you're not free to do what you really want to do. There's something in me that is controlling me. And in some ways, it's even worse than being controlled by a government. And I'll tell you why. Because if you're controlled by a government, you know what you can do? You pick yourself up, you get on a plane, and you go to another country, and now you're free. But if it's something in me, I can take a spaceship to the moon. When I get off the moon, Shalom Aleichem, he's with me. He came on the plane, he got a free ticket, and he's there with me. And it's my nature, and I can't control myself, whatever it is, whether it's laziness, whether it's arrogance, whether it's jealousy, whether it's anger, or any other of the negative character traits. So the free person is the person that's able to be in control of themselves. That person's free. And that's where the Torah teaches us how a person could be in control of himself. So before I explain this completely, let me point to number 3 and number 4. Number 3 reads, Tzadikim Liban B'Shusan, and number 4 is Rishoyim B'Shus Liban. Again, these are all quotes from the Talmud, from the Gemara. Tzadikim, the righteous, these are people that their heart is in their hands. The wicked is the opposite, that they are in the hands of their heart. In other words, a person who doesn't live a decent life means he's allowing his heart to control him. And he's in a sense a slave to his impulses, to his desires, to the things that he wants. And even if he realizes it's not a good idea, he sort of can't help himself because there's a force inside that's pulling and he's not in control. A tzaddik, person who follows Torah, is in control, and therefore this person is really considered a free person. So the question
is connected to number 1.
They're all 4 connected. I want to explain number 2, but first of all, number 1 is that the brain controls the heart. So therefore, a person that lives that way, that his brain controls the heart, his heart is in his hands. Person doesn't live that way, then he ends up having that he is in the hands of his heart. But the question that people will ask is, what do I need Torah for? If the brain controls the heart, then all I need is a brain. If I'm smart, and I'm intelligent, and I want to live a decent, moral, ethical life, so I don't need Torah. My brain will tell me what's right, and that's what I'll do. So why does it say that it's the Torah that makes the person a free person? So here we come into this point to understand, and this is going to come up a lot in Pirkei Avos, is that we cannot totally trust our brain, believe it or not. Why? So let me tell you an interesting halacha in Jewish law. One of the commandments in the Torah is that a judge has to be a person that's impartial. He's not allowed to be someone that's going to have any kind of gain from from whatever this case is all about. And he can't be related to any of the two parties because then he's involved. He's not objective. And therefore, if an individual is related to someone that's in the case, he's disqualified. Now, the halach is, it makes no difference who the person is. Even if it were Moshe Rabbeinu, and two people come because they have a dispute over $25, and one of them is a cousin of Moshe Rabbeinu, he's disqualified. Now, the question is like this. Do we suspect that someone like Moshe Rabbeinu, the one who gave us the Torah, took us out of Egypt, the greatest prophet that ever lived, that he's going to give a false judgment so his cousin could get $25 in this case? Or in any case, not intentionally, but what?
They're trying to remove any bias.
Right.
So even if like you're trying really hard not to, you're not.
Okay, that's the point I want to bring out. So the halacha is this way because we believe, Torah believes, that if you are related to one of the parties involved, even if you want to give the right judgment, but every judgment requires a certain, you have to judge the situation, you have to weigh things, there's pros and cons. Subconsciously, if you have any kind of leaning to one side, subconsciously, that's going to have an impact on your judgment. So therefore, you can't trust your judgment. Even if you have no intention whatsoever to distort the judgment, it's going to happen because you either have financial gain or some other gain. So subconsciously, this will affect you. If that's the case with this, it applies to many other things. If I say, for example, I don't need Torah, I don't need Hashem, I have a brain, I'll do what's right. So now the question is, but if I want something very much, and it really is going to make a huge difference in my life, I could gain $1 million if I do something, and then I'm questioning, what am I doing? Is it moral what I want to do? Is it not moral? I can't trust my intellect because there's such a big gain or there might be such a big loss. My brain can be trusted. My brain will sort of find all sorts of reasons and logic that what I really want deep down is going to make sense to me, even though it doesn't make sense. Did you ever have an experience that you spoke to a friend and the most ridiculous thing made sense to her and doesn't make sense to you? And the reason is because she was personally involved and she thinks that whatever someone else did was really wrong, but it's because it personally involved her. You're looking at it objectively and you say to yourself, don't you see that you were wrong, that this was the wrong thing to do? They tell this joke that there was a woman that was speaking about her two children that got married, her son and her daughter. And she said, my daughter is married. I'm so happy. I'm so proud that looking at this couple. My son, forget it. Then she explains, my daughter, her husband treats her like a queen. She wakes up in the morning. Before she even gets out of bed, he walks in with a tray, crackers and coffee and tea. And what do you want? And what do you need? It's a pleasure just to watch. My son is like a slave to his wife. She can't even get out of bed. He has to bring her food to the bedroom before she gets out of bed. The person doesn't even hear what they're saying in one sentence. So how can it be? Is it a slave or is it a queen? So the answer is, it depends. If it's my daughter, then it's a queen. If it's my son, then he's a slave. But unfortunately, this is the way most people think. They can talk about something that they themselves are doing, and yet they'll criticize someone else and they don't realize it. When I do it, it's okay. I don't even see that it's a problem. When you do it, it's such a terrible thing. But that's the way the brain works. We can't trust our brain because if I want something very much, and again, I hate to bring in this example, but it's probably the most powerful example we can bring, is when you think what happened in Germany. The Germans were not a third world country. They weren't uncivilized people. These were people that were educated. They were considered what? They were the upper class people with ethics and people with all sorts of, they were what they call the enlightened people, intelligent people, and yet they did things that most human beings can't even watch and they read a book of what they write. They have nightmares for who knows. And these people live this way and they enjoyed what they were doing. And it made perfect sense to them that what they're doing is okay. Why? Because they wanted it to be okay. When you want something very much, the most ridiculous things can make sense. So how could it's a catch-22. So how can I know that I'm doing the right thing? So the answer is, when there's a higher authority than me and my brain, which is Hashem, and he tells me this is right and this is wrong, so I'm not trusting my brain. I'm trusting the higher authority, which is the authority that's telling us what's really the truth. And then I use my brain to control my heart. But not I'm trusting my brain to know what's right and what's wrong, because that won't get me too far. There's a mashal that's given, a little story, and it's used many different ways, but it could apply here as well, that they tell a story that somebody once visited a town, and he took a walk, went outside of the town where there was a little forest, and he noticed that on every tree, there was a picture of a target, and there was an arrow right in the center, bullseye, right in the center. And dozens of trees like that. And he's thinking to himself, wow, there must be somebody here that's extremely talented, that every time he shoots it, he gets it right in the center. And he tries to find out who it is, and he finds out it's a young boy. So he calls him, and he asks some questions. How did you do this? Who taught it to you? How many years did it take you? When did you start? At what age? So the boy says like this, I do it different than most people. Most people, first they draw the target on the tree, then they shoot the arrow. Sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't. I do it differently. First I shoot the arrow in the tree, then I draw the target around it, and it always comes out in the right place. What's the mashal? The mashal is, if my basis for what's right and what's wrong is my own brain, and sometimes I'll get it, sometimes I won't. But if I have a higher authority, which is Hashem, and he says stealing is not ethical, and killing is not ethical, and cheating is not ethical, and this is not ethical, and no budget. This is emes, this is the right thing. Now I'm going to use my brain to understand it. My brain will go in the right direction because the arrow is in. I know what the truth is. So basically, that's what it means for a person to be truly free, to be able to control their emotions, and also to not allow the emotions to dictate to my brain what's right and what's wrong. I have to be able to submit myself to Hashem, which is in the Torah, and that tells me what's right and what's wrong. That's how we approach the character traits that we're talking about. Got it? Any questions? No. Okay. This is just a little humor, but at the bottom, number 5, it says 2 words. One word is melech, and one word is lemach. Does anyone remember the word lemach from last week's parsha? Lemach? No. Okay, in last week's parsha, you didn't have much of a chance to learn about it, but there was a person called Lemach. And by mistake, he went hunting, and instead of shooting the animal, he shot the arrow at his own great-grandson. You know what I'm talking about? And he killed him. And when he heard that he killed his great-grandson, he was so upset, he clapped his hands, and he killed his grandson who was standing next to him, who was taking him through the forest. So when people like to refer to someone who's really clumsy and doesn't know what he's doing, they call him a lemach. That's the term that's used. But again, this is just for humor, that the difference between the 2 words is the same letters, but one is spelled mem, lamed, chaf. One is lamed, mem, chaf. The difference is the order. The one that's melech, which means a king, the order is first mem, which stands for moach, the brain. Lev is the heart. Kaved is the liver. There are 3 organs that are major organs in the body. The brain, which is the intellect. The heart, which is the emotion. The liver, which is the blood, that has more to do with the action. So the order is first the brain, then the heart, then the liver. Lemach, which is the one who does everything wrong, The lamed comes first, which means the heart, and then comes the brain, and then comes the liver. So what he does is upside down. That's the point.
What did the things with the brain, heart, liver stand for?
Mem, the mem spells
No,
it.
like, you said like.
These are three major organs of the body, as the brain, the heart, and the liver.
So it's like,
And they're called like the king of the body. They're really, if they're in order, the rest of the body is in a healthy condition. But the order is first the brain, then the heart, then the liver, which means intellect, emotion, action. The other way is emotion, then goes intellect, then goes action. There's one more thing on this page, which is also a very famous quote. Al kol shoyim techasa ava. Self-love. Really, it shouldn't be translated that way. I think you should cross out the word self, because the true translation of this word is love covers all faults. When you love someone, you don't notice their faults. You don't care about it. It doesn't register in your head. So someone falls in love with another person, and a family member will come and say, "Are you kidding? This person is this, and this person is that. It's going to be trouble." But because you're so emotionally involved, you don't see it. It doesn't bother you. That means love covers. So it says in the Torah that the greatest love is the love we love ourselves. So as a result of that, we don't see our own faults. That's why we need a mirror. Because if I have something on my forehead, I'll never know about it unless I look into a mirror. Why? Because I can't see myself. I can't see what's wrong with me, because love covers up on all things. So basically, it's very hard to control my emotions and to control my impulses and to realize I'm doing something wrong. Because of self-love, I will justify and find ways to excuse my behavior and say it's okay to do this because of this reason and that reason, and it's because of self-love. So this is the general principle. It's almost like an introduction to the whole Pirkei Avos. If we want to be in control of our emotions, if we want to be in control of our impulses, we have to first learn and know what is right and what is wrong. And then this is what we have to master, this exercise, to master this principle that my mind will control my heart. And then you're in a good place. Okay, now we'll go back to the page we spoke about yesterday, page number 3, about making a fence. Said the purpose of a fence means that sometimes I need to make a fence to prevent me from doing something that's wrong. We gave the example like Muktzah on Shabbos, or the example of Yichud and other laws in Torah, but it also applies to me on a personal level. If I know that I have a certain weakness in a certain area, weakness towards another person, weakness in a certain situation, then what I need to do is make a fence, which means I should not wait till I get to the point where I'm right on top of the situation and then hope to be in control, but I should distance myself and sort of prevent myself from getting in that situation in the first place. I know that's very vague, but every person can find something. But to give an example, they tell a story that a person had a bad case of ulcers. And the doctor told him that he's not allowed to drink any liquor, because last time he did, he was brought into the emergency where his life was in danger, so you got to stay away from it. And he said, you know what? From now on, if you see a liquor store, cross the other side of the street. Don't even walk on that side of the street, because you're so used to drinking, you're not gonna, okay. Next time he goes outside, he passes the liquor store and he crosses the street. And he says to himself, what am I, a baby? I'm not in control. I know what I have to do. He looks back on the street, passes the liquor store, and he stops and he says, listen, they told me not to buy anything, not to drink anything, but I could look at the bottles, just remember the good old days that I had. And he's standing there looking at the bottles. And then he says, and what's wrong with walking into the store? I can walk in. He walks into the store, looks around. Then he thinks to himself, actually, if I take a bottle home, not drink it, just to take it home, it should be in the house. Every time I look at it, it'll make me feel good. So he buys a bottle, takes it home. The next thing he says to himself is, I'm not allowed to drink it, but I can at least sniff it. Anyway, the next thing was he's under the table with an empty bottle. Because basically that's the way it works. The Torah comes along and says, yeah, you can do a little thing like this, a little thing like that. So these are the fences we're talking about. If you know that you have a certain weakness, back off a little bit. They have a sign, there's a cliff here, stay 200 feet back. Why can't I walk until the edge of the cliff and make sure that I don't fall down? Because unfortunately, many people did that and lost their lives. If you want to be safe, go back 200 feet. Don't go so close. So that's called making a fence for the Torah. And in fact, some people don't appreciate it. And they say, okay, I know the Torah says you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that, but why is the fence necessary? And the answer is because Hashem knows our weaknesses. We're humans, he created us. And therefore, he gave us certain halachas, certain rules that'll help us be on top of the situation. That's by making the fence. However, not always is it a good thing. Sometimes you make a fence and you're doing too much and you're restricting yourself too much and it backfires. And there's actually a perfect example of this in last week's parsha. Anybody can guess what I'm talking about? The last week's parsha is a story of someone that made a fence that wasn't necessary and it caused a lot of problems.
Oh, when Adam said you can't eat the tree or touch it.
Very good. What happened was that Hashem told Chava and Adam, they were told, don't eat from the tree. And when the snake said to her, why don't you eat the tree from the tree? She said, God told us not to touch it. So she went a step further. Not only not eat it, not even touch it. So Rashi says, what did the snake do? He pushed her against the tree. Look, you weren't electrocuted. You touched it, nothing happened. And just like nothing happened when you touched it, nothing will happen when you eat it. She was convinced and she ate it. And the rest is history, right? So the Gemara says, that teaches us that sometimes if you take on restrictions that are not necessary, actually backfires. So even though you have this rule, take on a little bit of an extra restriction, you have to be careful and know the balance, when yes and when not. Sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative. We'll talk about it a little bit more next class. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.